Good morning, good Monday morning, and welcome back to our podcast, Monday Morning Talks. I'm here with Mark, and it's President's Day. We finished our series yesterday on changed lives, and we were looking at the encounter that Nicodemus had with Jesus in John chapter 3. So, Mark, this is your sermon, and I don't want to necessarily hijack your message, or I really, hopefully we can complement that in conversation and stuff. But in preparation or even in preaching yesterday, was there anything that you felt like, man, I wish we could have talked about that more, or I want to talk and say more about that? Or
well, this series, all these texts have been fairly lengthy. And so I think it's part of the reason we started this podcast, so we could address some of the holes or some of the things we didn't talk about. And there were a few things that we could have talked about, I could have talked about. And one was leading into chapter 3 with Nicodemus. In chapter 2 has an interesting couple of verses right before the Nicodemus passage. It says, because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. And we know that's why Nicodemus, part of the reason he came, says, hey, we know the miracles you do show evidence that God is with you. But, back in chapter 2, it says, but Jesus did not trust them because he knew human nature. Those who were believing, trusting in him because of miracles. Jesus didn't trust them. And then it says no one needed to tell Jesus what mankind is really like. Well, duh, of course, that's true. But it's just interesting. That leads right into the Nicodemus who comes kind of based on his miracles. And of course, Jesus doesn't even address the miracle aspect. He just goes into being born of the water and the Spirit and stuff like that. So that's kind of an interesting little lead in. I thought of...
and of the encounters we've talked about, is this the only one that there wasn't a miracle involved?
I think that's true.
Nicodemus is the only one of the four we've looked at where Jesus didn't do a miracle.
Yeah.
Literally to
interesting.
Nicodemus.
Yeah. Well, so I remember Dr. Strauss years ago used to say, and it's kind of true, but I don't think it's totally true. He would say, what you win them with is what you win them to. Mm-hmm. If you win them with parties and all that, well, you won them to parties. And I think there's kind of truth in that. If you come to Jesus because of the miracles you're going to receive, well, that's what you want from Jesus. And I think today a modern parallel to that would be the health and wealth gospel. Man, if I can get health and wealth by coming to Jesus, well, that's what I'm going to want from him. And so I want what Jesus can give me instead of wanting Jesus himself.
Yeah.
And sometimes those get a little crowded.
For whatever reason, the miracle that sticks out to me the most when it comes to that kind of thing, and Jesus even responding to it, was the feeding.
Yeah.
When they come back the next day.
Yeah.
And he's just like, no.
Yeah.
And that leads into the whole bread of life conversation and stuff. But it actually says that at the end of that, what is that, chapter 5 or something of John? But, Jesus actually says at the end of it, he says, or Jesus doesn't say it, John says it, but that a significant number of the disciples left him that day. Because he didn't do it.
Yeah.
Again.
It is just kind of interesting how he attracts the crowds and then he offends them. And there's another little thing I didn't mention yesterday. He comes to Jesus and says, we know. It's not I know. And so there's some others. Some think maybe he had some disciples. Some people say maybe there are even some disciples with him that night. I think it's more he's speaking on behalf of some other Pharisees, maybe some other Sanhedrin. We know, but we're going to be secret about it because of the cost of being. I kind of wonder if Joseph of Arimathea was one of those. And it said later Joseph of Arimathea believed, but he kept it secret.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's more than just Nicodemus involved in this. And then the other thing, and I didn't want to get into it, but it's kind of instructive. We have the Trinity in John 3. He talks about the Spirit, be born in water and the Spirit. And then he talks about the Son being lifted up like the snake lifted up that you did your communion meditation. And then, of course, we have God so loved the world. So we actually have the Trinity in that passage as well. Those are a few things I didn't bring up that I thought, probably could have gone with some of those, but I'm limited in time. You only give me 20, 25 minutes. So.
I feel like I feel more pressure on the time than I feel like you should. Yeah, I probably tend to be a little more comfortable talking longer, and I think it's harder for me maybe than it is for you to stay in that time constraint.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be a constraint, but it is for me. So
anyway,
well, one of the things I really wanted to kind of continue to talk about some from the sermon, or ask you to kind of expand on, and I feel like we can some conversationally, but so Nicodemus, it says right at the beginning of the text, I think in verse 1, he's a ruler of the Jews. Mm-hmm. So he's pretty well off as far as what he does. He's a Pharisee, he's a member of the Sanhedrin, and I was looking into that some. Only 70 people in all of Israel would have had his role.
Right.
So we're talking about an elite group of people here. He would have been very educated.
Yeah.
And honestly, his life's work was to know and enforce God's law. He had made that his career. He had given his life to it. And so for Jesus to say to Nicodemus then, I think it's interesting. We didn't bring it up. We talked about it some with the woman at the well. She came in the middle of the day because that was, she was coming to the well because of the way she felt. Why is Nicodemus coming? And not because Nicodemus is probably, of all of these people, he's the one who could have approached Jesus in public and it not been weird. He could have approached Jesus at any time, at any point of the day, and it wouldn't have been but he comes in the night, and it hints at what you were saying about Joseph of Arimathea. Like there was a little bit of a rub there, trying to stay a little bit secretive. There was a threatening aspect to it, and Jesus really goes in on that when he just says, look, unless you're born of the Spirit, unless you're reborn, and that's kind of, you talked about that yesterday, rebirth is the big piece here, but he says, you won't see the kingdom. And, my thoughts with that is like, gosh, if you would have just flat out asked Nicodemus, do you think you're going to see the kingdom of God? Oh, 100%.
Sure.
Absolutely. Like I've given my life
he was right with God
to being right with God and enforcing his law.
Yeah.
But you made a statement as your sermon developed. It was probably somewhere, I would say, like right at the hinge point of your sermon, right toward the middle of your sermon. You kind of talked about this concept of like, man, what is it that we chase after or go after that leaves us? Do you remember exactly how you said it? It was a question you put out there.
It was kind of fill in the blank. For me to be completely fulfilled, complete joy, what would it take?
Yeah.
What would it take?
And there's I was thinking as you were talking, like this discontentment that you were kind of getting at, this restlessness that exists. And that's really what I wanted to talk some about today. Like, so I'll start on a personal level.
Okay.
How would you fill in that blank?
Here's, what is the one thing separating you from fulfillment? I just found it here. What's the void in your life? And as we go through life, I think there's different things. Well, when I graduate, then things are going to be better. Maybe not fulfilled, but at least better. When I get married, or when the kids come or kids leave. So there's different points of that, but there's never total fulfillment.
And the reason I was asking you, like on a personal level, because I'm just thinking, like for a lot of people my age, I think what maybe the one piece that a lot of people in the season of life that I'm in, that I think a lot of my age group would say retirement. You know what I mean? And so I was wondering from your perspective.
Yeah, good question. I was going to say,
what I mean? That. Like what at your season of life, I'm not asking just for you. Obviously, hopefully you would say Jesus, but I mean, like, what do you perceive to be the thing? You know, like, if you weren't a Jesus follower, like, what would you be leaning into that you think? Or what would answer that for you?
Big thing today is family, of course. You know, family is very important. But man, family without Jesus, it just would be kind of what's the point of anything, you know? Mm-hmm. But on the retirement thing, I do remember looking forward to retirement, saving for, and, you know, just can't wait to get there. And people would say, man, retirement, you're going to love it. It's wonderful and all that. And to be honest, I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
I enjoy the part-time role here. There's a lot more, less stress.
Even though you're not on a beach somewhere, but you're
I'm
here
not on
in
a
the
beach.
snow.
Yeah,
I mean, we're looking at it.
Yeah, Ellen likes the beach. Here. I'm not so much. I like the mountains. But anyway, and retirement's not the end all. Yeah. I mean, it's fine. It's good. It's a good time of life. But other times of life has its good points and bad. You know, the bad thing about retirement, you're getting older. Your body's getting older, and there is no complete fulfillment in this life.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing, and I think that's why there's so much depression and anxiety and stuff like that. And there's other reasons for it too, but we want this American dream, which is almost heaven. We want heaven now.
I don't even know that. I feel like maybe more than ever we've confused what even the American dream is.
Well, that's
because we've got a younger generation right now that aren't chasing that immediately.
What are they chasing?
I think and that gets kind of segues into like, you know, for me thinking about this, I was like, man, what really illustrates Nicodemus here in our world today? You know, because this guy has gone all in to what he does. Yeah. And Jesus just rocks the whole thing, just blows it up saying, it's not enough. You're not enough.
Yeah.
Unless you're born of the Spirit, it's the Spirit that makes you enough. And so I'm just thinking like, man, I think maybe one of the most pressure-filled things like that we do is just that transition from high school. And, you know, we've got all this pressure deciding, what am I going to go to school for?
Yeah.
What am I going to spend thousands of dollars and years of my life to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And then, honestly, I think what this moment is like for Nicodemus is the person who spends, you know, potentially 6 figures and 4 to 5 years of their life, and then gets into that career and goes, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I don't think. And so you've gone all in to this, like you've put so much into preparing for it. And then you realize, like, kind of like you were saying, the fulfillment's just not there. Like, and so, gosh, like that's a devastating, and it creates a fear in us. Like you're saying, I mean, the anxiety and depression of that, and, you know, it's debilitating almost to go, well, I'm supposed to make this huge, massive decision. And what if I make the wrong one?
Yeah. Well, Nicodemus' situation is even more serious because we're talking about eternity and, you know, kingdom of God and stuff. And it's like to use the old analogy, he's climbing the ladder and then he finds out the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. And Jesus just exposes all that. And which, by the way, later on in John 3, talks about being the light. Of course, Jesus brings light and he exposes things in our own lives. And anyway, the Nicodemus study was really, really, I requested this and I really enjoyed it because he is so much like us, and more so than the other three, I thought. Mm-hmm. He's pretty well off. And most people we got struggles, everybody got struggles, but, you know, we're pretty well off. with education and money and things like that.
He doesn't come to Jesus with as desperate a need.
Yeah, desperate's the word. Yeah,
as we see with some of the other people, but in reality, I think what Jesus exposes is like a leveling of the playing field, I guess.
Yeah.
Of exposing to Nicodemus that like actually you're as desperate
as the woman
at the well, as the blind man, as the man at the pool, like because you're absent of me. Yeah. You're absent of the Spirit.
And we see it in the church here. The people who are going through a really hard time seem to be more open to what God is doing in their lives, or open to where Jesus might be leading them.
Sure.
If everything's going well, and I kind of alluded to that yesterday, what do I need Jesus for? Everything's good.
We set ourselves up for that season to come, I think. Like honestly, because where I'm at, like I think what happens is, man, as young families, even at times, we put everything into the parenting role. We put everything into, like you said, family.
Yeah.
And so whether or not that becomes the sports thing, at other churches I've been at in the past, the show choir thing, or the whatever it is, like we just something takes over to, we want to set our kids up for that.
Yeah. And we want them to find their niche.
And honestly, what I've noticed, because I've lived through it with some even elders, others that I've been in leadership with, like, man, there's a day coming where you empty nest and realize, like, oh, I made that everything.
Yeah.
And now what do I do?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, you think about it from kids' perspective, and it's just like, oh, mom and dad did everything, and now what do I do? And so we've kind of set each other up for this like train wreck where we realize, like, oh, that wasn't everything I thought it was.
We were just talking to an older mother just this morning about this. And she said, our kids were in sports and all that. And then when it's over, you thought, what was the big deal? Why was that such a big deal? Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be numero uno. I think, if I were to give any parenting advice, I would give the advice that what my mom and dad did. They said, we don't care what direction you go, vocationally or anything like that. We want you to find your niche, but you keep Christ first. And that has to be the guiding light for us. And when parents lose that, that's when you're gonna find out it wasn't worth it. So.
Yep. Well, and some of what you and I talked about this morning, that, if you really dig into that then, and we heard that this weekend, I'll put in a little plug here, but we went to the church leaders conference at Lincoln, and which was very well done. Great speakers, Mark Scott, Brian Lowry.
Yeah, it was good.
Andrew Fitzgibbon. Fitz did an awesome job. Yeah. And, but one of the things that was kind of put before us is just this leadership pipeline that's starting to run dry. Yeah. And even that factors into this conversation. Like Trevor was just here, our worship leader, before we started recording. And I was talking with him, and he and I kind of have experienced it in opposite ways. So coming out of high school, man, I had other plans. I had other things in place to try to maybe follow in my dad's footsteps with the military and other things. And I felt like I disappointed my family, and even got a little bit of pressure that, like, you're going to do this ministry thing full time, but like, you're not going to be able to make a living doing that. You're not going to be able to provide for your family like we want you to. And, so all this stuff we're talking about played into that, like, that making an occupation out of ministry is not a good idea, and it was just like, I think some of those obstacles early on are what strengthened my resolve, even to my calling, to some degree, you know. But on the flip side, then someone like Trevor, you know, and he's telling us like, man, I felt like I may be kind of disappointed in my family because I didn't
go into ministry.
You know, I think maybe my mom and my grandma would have liked that to happen, and I didn't. But you know, so in a non-traditional way, he's come back to that now.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like I look at that and I've watched that. I've had students leave presidential scholarships at universities to go into ministry full time. I've watched, you know, someone like Trevor leave his career in education to go all in to ministry. And you know, I don't know that we emphasize that enough in the church. I'm certain we don't.
Well,
I'm certain that we don't put that calling in front of students as much as we should. We don't champion it as much as we should. And maybe it is because like a little bit of the American dream finds its way into the church. I know that it does, but you know, just this idea that like, man, what greater call really could there be, you know, than completely following Jesus in obedience? And that doesn't mean occupational ministry,
right,
necessarily, but you know, that's really what Jesus is setting up here. He says it 3 times. I pick up on that just reading through the text a couple times. 3 times Jesus responds to or says to Nicodemus, truly, truly.
Yeah.
Truly, like he's trying to get his attention.
Yeah.
And actually, the first 2 times he says truly, truly, he says unless. So it's almost ultimatum based.
Yeah.
He says truly, truly, unless you follow me, you're not going to see the king. Truly, truly, unless you make this.
Well, and for Nicodemus, it was going to be a tough decision. We don't know if he actually did follow Jesus or not.
We've speculated.
Again,
we can go ahead and put that out there. We're on opposite sides of the speculation.
Yeah, you're more optimistic. No, you're more.
I'm less optimistic.
Yeah, you're less optimistic.
You're optimistic that he actually followed Jesus after this encounter.
Yeah,
I'm a little less optimistic that it might. Now, I think ultimately he did. And we see that at the end of John. You know, he's with Joseph of Arimathea making burial arrangements.
Yeah.
But and maybe it's just because of my love of a good story. Like, I love the story of this slow progression for Nicodemus of, man, he's on the fence for sure. But everything that he would have experienced, you know, if he's in the Sanhedrin, then he'd have been there when they put Jesus on trial. He'd have been present for all of the Passion Week experiences and the flogging. And, you know, he'd have been there to know, wait, we've got these 2 criminals who absolutely, if justice is served, should be on that cross. And we're putting the innocent guy, like he's there. He sees all of that. And then he's with Joseph. I don't know. I like the story of then maybe he's having flashbacks of this encounter as all that's going on, and then he sees Jesus on the cross and goes, oh, the Son of Man lifted up. And the serpent on a stick, and like
maybe that was
this
his
light bulb conversion moment. You know, but that's all speculation.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily there.
There is tradition that says he did follow Christ, got kicked out of the Sanhedrin, which would have happened. But again, we don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a great study. I appreciate the opportunity to get to preach once a month. That's great retirement gig.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I like that we got to lean into this conversation a little bit, because those heart wrestlings are a big deal. And I think even the wrestlings that we're talking about, we naturally have. You know, like I want to champion that for people better. You know, I want us to be better at, man, how can we help people who really are on the fence be all in?
Yeah.
and make these choices and decisions that say, man, the only way I will find fulfillment is in the Spirit, is in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So,
amen.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for your sermon. And next week, we start a new series, Light and Dark. And really, I think it's a good transition. We talked about light and darkness with Nicodemus. We talked about it some even last week. And so with the blind man and Jesus having that conversation. So now we're just going to go in on that and talk about it for a few weeks. So
looking forward to it.
Hope everybody has a great week. Thanks for being a part of our conversation.